German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met leaders of the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Saudi Arabia this weekend, but heads home with only a limited agreement to buy Emirati LNG as the country seeks to replace Russian supplies. Simone Foxman has more on this. She joins us from London. So, Simone, what are some of the nuances of this deal? And, how is this going to get sold to a very anxious domestic German population?
Well, Yusuf, I think the idea that Germany, that Olaf Scholz was going to go to the Middle East and suddenly come back with all this massive supply of LNG to stem the gas crunch was simply a pipe dream. But what he did come back with, it looks like, is 137,000 cubic meters of LNG from ADNOC that's going to be delivered to utility company RWE by early 2023. So this is a near-term sort of a deal. It is one that's going to make use of floating regasification plants that Germany is bringing in to allow itself to accept shipments of LNG. So there's a near-term element of this that's positive. But what didn't happen, Germany didn't strike new deals with Saudi Arabia or with Qatar. These are both deals that likely would have been long-term. That's sort of where we are on discussions either around LNG or around hydrogen. We didn't see a ton of movement there. And the German side has been very unwilling to try and accept these long-term contracts that folks like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia are demanding for these long-term supplies. And you have to think about this in the context of what Total Energy's CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, who was in Qatar, and we'll discuss this in a moment, he was saying that essentially European countries are being unrealistic. If you want a cheap price for short duration, he says, the answer is obviously no.
And then on the LNG front, Total Energies and Qatar announced a major new deal. What are some of the details there?
Yeah, this is a deal for what's called Northfield South. This is a second massive piece of a two-phase expansion project for Qatari LNG. This is a little bit longer term out, with the first natural gas or first LNG likely to be shipped out of the country in 2027, but Total a clear beneficiary here. We heard over the weekend on Saturday that the company would get 9.375% stake in that new project out of the overall 25% that Qatar wants to sell off. Total had gotten one of the largest stakes on offer for the Northfield East project. That's phase one of this program. Now getting a pretty sizable stake in Northfield South. So clearly there's a tie-up there between Total and Qatar that seems to continue. And Pouyanné, for his part, saying he would have taken more of this deal if it had been an offer.
And then on the geopolitical side of things, protests in Iran continued for a 10th day yesterday. We understand there have been more injuries, more fatalities. What's the latest?
Yeah, state TV saying that at least 41 people have been killed, but a lot of human rights organizations and others saying that that number is much higher. It's very hard to tell exactly what's going on in Iran right now because there have been widespread internet disruptions, internet outages, but it does seem like the government crackdown on these protests is intensifying even as they spread to more and more cities, and the protests appear to become even more emphatic than they had been in the past. You know, one thing here that is different potentially than previous protests is that this appears to have united a wide range of people across economic and social strata, progressive, conservative, rich, and poor. That is something that's been noted by a bunch of analysts watching these protests, also the involvement of Gen Z, the folks who've been born after the year 2000. Those are things that previous protests didn't have, but as yet they do seem to be a little bit smaller than the 2009 protests, the Green Movement. Again, we have to see how this plays out, particularly as this crackdown appears to be intensifying.